I'm Josh Tierney, and you're listening to the True North Country Comics podcast.
Welcome to the True North Country Comics podcast, dedicated to promote Canadian comic book creators and supporters. It's August 31st, 2020. I'm John Swinimer. If you have a comment, criticism, or question, you can contact me at john@truenorthcountrycomics.com. On this episode, I chat with Josh Tierney. The podcast is available on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts. Josh resides in Ontario, Canada, and he's the creator of the Eisner, Schuster, Harvey, and Diamond Gem Award-nominated Spira series of fantasy graphic novels from Archaea Boom Studios. He's also written the fantasy adventure graphic novel Hunters, and co-created the sci-fi miniseries Halogen with Afu Chan and Giannis Milonogiannis. WarmBloodComic.com is his high school mystery webcomic, soon available in print from Buno. His projects are created in collaboration with artists from around the world. So, without further ado, here's my chat with Josh Tierney. So Josh Tierney, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
Thanks, John.
I appreciate it. What I normally do to start the interview is ask the creator about their first comic book. So I'm wondering if you remember, what was the first comic book that you read?
The first comic book that I read was Super Mario Brothers 3 special issue from Valiant,
Wow.
which would have come out, I'm guessing, in the late 80s, early 90s.
It's very specific. Did it impress you at all?
I was a Mario fan, and I think for me, especially early on, I was mainly drawn to charming characters in adventure stories. So when I saw the cover, I saw the charming characters, and then when I flipped through it, I saw that it looked like a pretty imaginative adventure story. I think I could have been 6 or 7 when it came out.
So you were a big fan of the video game, I presume.
Yeah, I was a big fan. I grew
cool.
up watching my mother play it on a Nintendo.
Nice. Cool. So that leads me into my next question. I'm wondering who or what inspires you to create today?
Today, it would be my friends who are making comics, like Afu Chan and Kyla Vanderkloot, and a French pair of artists that go by Atelier Cento. But going beyond friends, I do mainly read manga.
Mm-hmm.
And I am currently writing a series for Viz. So all of my manga reading is paying off now.
Very good.
But the manga that I read, once again, my whole life, I'm drawn to charming characters in long-form adventure stories. Like the Mario comic was the first comic that I ever read, but the comic that had the biggest influence on me when I was a kid and that made me want to create comics was Bone by Jeff Smith.
Oh, yes, right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's something that as a kid I was collecting as the self-published cartoon books, black and white singles, like way before the Scholastic editions. A lot of different aspects of Bone, and especially reading it as a kid, influenced me at the time and motivated me to make my own comics as a kid. And even today, when I think about making comics, I think about Bone. Just the idea that one person was able to create a story on his own and put it out without any kind of interference. It was really impressive to me, and it wasn't something that I had thought about when I was a kid, since I mainly just thought that publishers were putting out everything, like Marvel, DC, Dark Horse, that kind of thing. So it was my first real encounter with a self-published comic. Once again, like, Bone is a very engrossing adventure story with the cutest possible characters, and they're all very well written with unique characteristics. I'd say even today, Bone would be an influence on my writing. Like Warm Blood, as experimental and weird as it can be, I still put a lot of emphasis on characters that are charming that you want to read more of. Because Warm Blood largely takes place in a single area, like Penny's neighborhood with her school and stuff like that. The adventures, just the absurd situations that she encounters while living her day-to-day life in one area.
Yeah, no,
that's my super rambling answer.
No, that's a great answer. In fact, that leads me right into my next question about Warm Blood, which is eclectic is a word I would use just because of all the different artists that use it. It's an ongoing webcomic, but forgive me, can you explain it to people how would you explain it to someone who's never seen Warm Blood before?
I like to simplify things as much as possible when I explain them. But I do think Warm Blood really is mainly a slice of life story about a girl's first year in high school. And then there's everything else on top of that. I briefly referred to Warm Blood as a murder mystery, but anybody who reads the first 3 pages knows that there's no mystery.
Yeah, we won't give anything away.
Yeah.
Well, what's unique about this, and I'll get to it in a bit, but you've written a story, but you're collaborating with artists from around the world to create the artwork. And my first question is, how did you find these people?
Nearly all of them I would have found online. Some of them are friends. Some are people that I've met at conventions. But it would be finding them on places like Tumblr, Twitter, and Instagram. I'm definitely a very visual person, and I feel like I've had an eye for art styles that at the very least appeal to me since a very young age, such as that Mario Brothers comic caught my eye because of its cover, which I still think is a great cover. And Bone has fantastic artwork. I still think Bone is like the best looking self-published American comic. So I've always been thinking in terms of art and artists. A lot of the artists that I invite to Warm Blood have those aspects that appeal to me, like they can draw cute, charming characters. But I'm also drawn to detailed backgrounds in other comics and in my own work, since I feel like if you have a believable sense of place, then it's easier to believe in the story no matter how weird it gets, like Warm Blood. Like Warm Blood gets really absurd, but there are aspects to it that do feel very real, at least to me, like Penny's bedroom, her house, her neighborhood, the school. Like I worked with the artists to kind of help ensure that everything feels believable. Like it feels like Penny's room is a room that she would sleep in and live in and work in, and that the school that she goes to feels like a real school that somebody could go to.
Yeah, it's definitely believable. It's definitely realistic in its interpretation. My question to you, though, is typically when a writer and artist work together, it's a collaborative effort. And that was one of the questions I had is like, do the artists, as the work comes in, do that sometimes change the storyline? Does it impact you in some way that you hadn't thought of before in terms of how a character would act or how a scene might play out?
Yeah, even very recently, there's an artist named Basil who added details to her scene or episode that I wouldn't have thought of, and which shows her understanding of the characters and how to depict their character acting. But it has them do things that I wouldn't have thought of that I wished I thought of, and that gives me more ideas for the future.
So that leads me to my next question. I mean, it looks to me like you've got a plot line from beginning to end going in here, and that the artists are somehow, as you just mentioned, impacting to some degree, not dramatically changing their storyline. Is that typically the way it works? So my major question is, what is the process for how you create from initial concept to the finished page?
My scripts are very detailed. in my opinion anyway, I feel like even with Warm Blood, which has, I imagine, like the maximum amount of artists you can put into a comic and still have it be readable, my scripts are detailed enough that you could read one chapter, which cycles through 6 different artists, and not feel terribly disconnected from it. So I have certain rules for myself, like I'll write an average of 6 panels per page so that you're not going to jump from one scene, which will have a 6-panel average, into the next artist, and then suddenly you're going to see something crazy like 12 panels per page. There are certain rules that I try to fall back on in order to create some semblance of consistency because of the very, very large amount of artists involved.
Yeah, it's tremendous. That's for sure. It's a lot of art. Like if you were to sit back and think of how this is playing out, would you have actually started this? If you were to say this many artists, you've got to keep on target and on track and sort of lined up. It seems like a big endeavor to me, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I very rarely take a step back and look at what it is I'm doing and how I'm doing it. It's only really when somebody points it out that I realize how much work is involved.
Oh.
But I just find a great amount of pleasure in working with a large amount of people. Like, I enjoy group projects, whether at school or for work. I enjoy hanging out with like a good amount of friends at a time. I just like that feeling of different perspectives and personalities bouncing off of each other.
Yeah, no, that's cool. That's cool. I mean, in this very unique experience we're working through right now, it seems like this is a great way to collaborate with people without having the convention experience that we typically have for networking. Yeah. So it's a great way to sort of let loose and get that creativity flowing.
Yeah. There are different things that I do to try and make the comic consistent despite the large amount of artists. One is that I'll pick different artists to be the character designer for a certain character. And then that way we have a character sheet that the artist can draw from for reference, with the only real changes being their wardrobes. Like the characters' outfits will change on a day-to-day basis within the comic, but their core design stays the same. So I feel like that's one way to keep things a little bit consistent as it goes from artist to artist. For example, Penny is designed by Afi-chan, and Eve is designed by an artist named Mathilde Kitté. It's a French artist.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Absolutely. So warmbloodcomic.com, it continues on, and it will for some time. So I'm wondering, this is probably taking up a fair chunk of your time. So I'm wondering, do you have time for any other projects that are in the works?
So drawing comics, of course, takes much, much, much longer than writing them. So for almost a year now, I had been about 15 chapters ahead of where Warm Blood was because I had written so many scripts. Warm Blood is definitely a personal project for me, and with my personal projects, if I don't have anything professional going on for a publisher, then it's something that I can write on my own time, because I have pretty much a compulsion to write. If I don't write something, then I'm pretty much saddled with guilt. So I try to write once a day, and only then will I allow myself like entertainment, like TV or anything like that. Mm-hmm. But it's difficult for me to do anything without having written something first. So Warm Blood, chapter 20 will probably go up in September. The next 5 chapters after that are already written. And those could take, I'm going to guess, a little over half a year to come out in comic form. So I'm way ahead on Warm Blood, which is good because I am currently working on the Viz series. All I can say about that is that I'm working on a Viz series.
Right.
I just have permission to just say that.
So where can people find out more about your work and future projects online?
Right now, I mainly just have a social media presence. So Warm Blood is at warmbloodcomic.com. You can also find it at Webtoon and Tapas. which I think warmbloodcomic.com is best if you're reading it on a laptop or desktop computer, because we put high-res pages there, and you can see the art at the best possible quality outside of print. But if you're going to read on your phone, then you should read it on Webtoon and Tapas. For my social media, I'm on Twitter at JW Tierney, Instagram at Josh W. Tierney, and Tumblr at Josh Tierney, since other Josh Tierneys got to Twitter and Instagram before I did.
Thanks to Josh for the chat. You can discover more about Josh on Twitter at JW Tierney and online at joshtierney.tumblr.com. You can purchase Warm Blood Volume 1 in comic stores, bookstores, and from publisher Buno Books at buno.bigcartel.com/product/warm-blood-volume-1. And thanks to you for listening to the True North Country Comics podcast. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to and like this podcast on Apple Podcasts. And please leave a good rating. Also check out the TrueNorthCountryComics.com website and follow along on Twitter at TrueNorthComics. Please send your feedback to John at TrueNorthCountryComics.com. Thanks again for listening, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics Podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2020.